Hello and welcome, and thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Joker Rogers. Here's what's coming up within the hour. UN humanitarian chief says 14,000 babies in Gaza could die in the next 48 hours if more aid doesn't reach them. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war can end soon if Hamas releases its hostages and lays down arms. Plus, US President Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiating towards a ceasefire and an end to the war. Let's begin the world today. 14,000 babies could die within 48 hours in the Gaza Strip if more humanitarian aid is not allowed to go in. This is the latest alarm raised by the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, who calls the current flow of aid a drop in the ocean and falls far short of needs. Only 5 trucks carrying supplies were allowed in a day ago, while more trucks are expected in the coming days. Each must first pass through Israeli security inspections. Israel has tightly restricted aid to Gaza for the past 11 weeks, accusing Hamas of stealing supplies. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war could end immediately if Hamas releases all hostages and its leaders go into exile. The statement is in response to mounting international pressure from the United Kingdom, France and Canada, who issued a rare joint statement urging an immediate ceasefire and greater humanitarian access or risk facing concrete consequences. Later, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, addressing the House of Commons, repeated that the UK, French and Canadian governments' demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free hostages. But Mr. Netanyahu says calling for a ceasefire now rewards terrorism and insists Israel will continue its offensive until total victory is achieved. Also, the UK has suspended trade talks with Israel and summoned the Israeli ambassador over what it calls the intolerable offensive in the Gaza Strip.
About the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend we coordinated a response with our allies, as set out in my statement with President Macron and Prime Minister Carney last night. And I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza, a basic quantity, is totally and utterly inadequate. So we must coordinate our response, because this war has gone on for far too long. We cannot allow the people of Gaza to starve. And the Foreign Secretary will come to the House shortly to set out our response in detail.
Now let's bring in former Israeli government spokesperson Elon Levy. Elon, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Hello, good afternoon.
Right, so Israel says it's allowing 108 trucks into Gaza after 11 weeks of complete closure. What could have informed these changes?
Well, Israel has been monitoring the humanitarian situation and has always said that to the extent supplies run dry, it will let more aid in. And supplies have run out a little bit earlier than expected because Hamas has been hijacking aid. Since the beginning of the war, the Hamas regime in Gaza has been hijacking aid trucks, selling them on the black market, and using the money to pay its terrorists and to prolong this war. And what Israel is trying to do now is to put in place a new mechanism that makes sure aid gets to people who need it and that terrorists can't steal it. Because we cannot allow Hamas to continue enriching itself by stealing humanitarian aid. That must end. Aid must get to the people who need it, and Hamas cannot intercept it along the way.
And the UN fears that 14,000 babies could die if more aid does not arrive. It will take some time for aid to get to hard-to-reach places. Could this push Israel to hasten the flow of aid despite its concerns about Hamas?
No, first of all, that's an appalling scare tactic. Israel let baby formula in just yesterday to make sure that the Strip has the food that it needs. Now, Israel says this new mechanism to get aid straight to people who need it, a US initiative, by the way, is going to take some time to get up and running. And that's why Israel is letting in more aid through the existing mechanism. It's a broken mechanism. It's very problematic. Hamas has exploited it in the past in order to enrich itself. But we don't want to see starvation in the Gaza Strip because Hamas is stealing aid. So Israel is letting in food. But the fact remains that this war could end tomorrow if Hamas released the hostages and surrendered. You quoted the Prime Minister earlier and said that this statement was in response to recent diplomatic changes. This is something Israel has been saying since the beginning of the war. Since Hamas launched this war on October 7th, 2023, the option has been on the table. Surrender, go into exile, release the hostages, and this war can end. And that is what every world leader needs to be demanding. Hamas surrender, not an end of the war that leaves Hamas in power to plot its next attacks.
And the United Kingdom, France, and of course Canada say they are horrified by the military escalation in the Gaza Strip and have threatened to take concrete actions against Israel if it does not stop its renewed offensive and lift, those restrictions on the Strip. Will this move Israel to back down if it's just a little bit?
Yeah, they're horrified. I'm horrified that Hamas has praised Britain, France, and Canada. You know that you're on the wrong side when the Hamas terrorist organization is praising you. And the reason Hamas is doing that is it thinks that Britain has thrown it a lifeline. Because it knows that if the war ends with Hamas still in power, it gets to remain in power. It gets to rebuild its tunnels, rebuild its missile arsenals, and the next war is a matter of time. That's why Israel is insisting on total victory. We want this to be the last Gaza war, or else there will be a next Gaza war and it will be worse. So Israel, I think, will continue repelling diplomatic pressure from these countries, saying the war cannot end with Hamas in power and hostages in Gaza, or you're just starting the clock for the next war that Hamas will start by massacring Israeli civilians like it did in that horrific terror attack on October 7th, 2023.
And so part of this diplomatic pressure, I might add, is the UK suspending trade talks with Israel and has summoned the Israeli ambassador over what it calls the intolerable offensive in Gaza. What could this mean for UK-Israeli relations?
Well, clearly UK-Israeli relations are not good because the British government has decided, in response to political pressure, the massive protests they've seen, public opinion that has been poisoned against Israel, to abandon their ally and take the side of the terrorist organization Hamas. I'm sure that's not what Britain is intending, and they would be horrified to hear that this is what they're doing. But Hamas is praising Britain because it's given it a lifeline. And it's trying to end the war in a way that leaves Hamas in power. So I think it's regrettable that Britain wants to cut off free trade talks. They were meant to help the British public and grow the British economy like the Prime Minister wants. But if they want to do so, that's their prerogative. Israel's top priority is not a new trade deal with the UK. It's removing the threat of a jihadi regime, our own little Boko Haram, on Israel's doorstep and freeing the hostages who are being starved and tortured in the dungeons of Gaza. That's our priority.
Right, and some residents of the Gaza Strip have been complaining about frequent evacuation orders because of possible strikes that are going to be some of the raids that is being carried out by Israel, in quotes, saying that it wants to root out all Hamas hiding places. And the people say they don't have anywhere to go when these evacuation orders are being given. What's in place for the people that are being adversely affected by these situations?
Israel keeps warning civilians in Gaza to get out of harm's way because it doesn't want them to be hurt and doesn't want them to get killed.
But where are they going to go?
Hamas's strategy is to fight from inside homes and schools and hospitals in civilian clothes, in civilian areas, in order to use civilians as human shields. It's a disgusting strategy, but Hamas is a terrorist regime that sees civilians not as human lives, but as martyrs. And so Israel is trying to frustrate Hamas's sick strategy and tell civilians, get out of Hamas strongholds. And I think anyone who cares about civilians in Gaza needs to help them get out of harm's way, out of Hamas strongholds. That is why Israel is designating areas it wants civilians to go so that it can attack Hamas without any civilians in the way. And the UN agencies should help Israel evacuate civilians because it's exactly what Israel is meant to do, to warn civilians that an attack is coming and do its utmost to keep them safe. You can't keep them safe if Hamas insists on fighting from inside and under their homes and they're not allowed to leave.
Well, overnight attacks reportedly killed at least 38 Palestinians in just 30 minutes. Israel says the war would end tomorrow. You also alluded to that. If, Hamas lays down its arms and frees all hostages, some of the other countries have also alluded to that. The question is, how realistic do you think this claim is? And I ask that because when we talk about these evacuation orders, and you say Hamas is also using people's homes, it's, dressed in plain clothes, you don't know who they are at a lot of points in time. So when people move away, of course, Hamas militants will also move with them, making people still unsafe anyway.
Exactly. Earlier in the war, Israel defined a humanitarian zone where people were meant to be safer, and Hamas terrorists kept moving along with them. They even fired missiles at Israel from inside the humanitarian zone, from inside refugee tents. And that shows the difficulty of the challenge Israel is facing. Israel is fighting in the most difficult urban warfare battlefield in history. And anyone who cares for civilians needs to help civilians get out of harm's way and then insist that Hamas surrender. Most of Hamas's leaders have already been killed. And what we need now is pressure on Hamas and on the countries supporting it, like Iran and Qatar, to tell Hamas's leaders, it's game over. It's over. You have to lay down your arms, leave power, and then everyone can move on. And this war that Hamas started on October 7th, 2023, with those horrific attacks against Israeli civilians, that war can finally end. The war can end tomorrow, and the war could have ended a year and a half ago if Hamas had surrendered.
Right, Ilan, thank you so much for your time on the program
Anytime.
today. Pleasure talking to you. Well, staying with the crisis, there might just be a way around that blockade. Israel's foreign ministry has revealed details of a new American model, some of which we just discussed a few minutes ago, for delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza, designed to ensure supplies reach civilians but not Hamas. Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Eden Bar, says the model was presented 10 days ago by U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. Mr. Bar claims that Hamas had previously hijacked aid deliveries and monetized supplies to recruit more militants. He adds that distribution sites are expected to start operating in days.
Israel facilitated the entrance of aid into the Gaza Strip throughout the war. During the 42nd days of the ceasefire starting in January, Israel facilitated the enormous amount of 25,000 trucks of aid into Gaza. This resulted in huge surplus in food and other items. But Hamas hijacked the aid. Hamas monetized the aid in order to feed its engine of war, recruiting militants, recruiting more terrorists, and weaponizing. This has prolonged the war, no question. Former US President Joe Biden himself stated in October 23rd that if Hamas would take control of the aid supply, it should be stopped. The purpose of the aid is to help the population, not to support Hamas. This is the rationale behind the new American model for aid presented 10 days ago by US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. Few words about the new model of aid. An international fund, GHF, will operate based on this principle: direct aid to the population in Gaza, but not to Hamas. Israel supports this plan fully. The fund will distribute the aid in several distribution centers located in safe areas in Gaza. The IDF will not take part of the distribution. The IDF will secure the perimeter. The distribution sites should be operating in a matter of days. Having said that, regarding the resuming of the aid today, I would like to elaborate a little bit. From the beginning of the war, Israel has stated clearly, we are monitoring the levels of basic items in Gaza, and we will facilitate the supply of items in low levels in order to avoid shortages.
Let's elaborate on other developments in this war. Families have indeed started to flee southern Gaza's Khan Yunis following evacuation orders by the Israeli Defense Forces. Residents say this evacuation is the 7th or 8th time they are being displaced without a safe place to go. In a post on X, Israeli Arab media spokesperson Avichai Adrei urged the immediate evacuation of Khan Yunis, Bani Suhaila and Abasan, instructing residents to move to Al-Mawas, declaring imminent unprecedented operations to destroy the capabilities of terrorist organizations. The Israeli military operations resumed in Gaza on March 18 after the collapse of a temporary Israel-Hamas ceasefire that had facilitated an exchange of captives between the two sides. Well, EU High Commission Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, has condemned Israel's blockade of aid to millions of people. Ms. Kallas, speaking at the European Humanitarian Forum, pledged to use every available diplomatic channel to mobilize political pressure and ensure that humanitarian principles are upheld in Gaza.
The world today is unstable, uncertain, and cruel. Man's inhumanity to man is there for all to see. People are going hungry when there is plenty of food to go around. This is the greatest paradox of our time. The UN has rightly called for a humanitarian reset. This is an opportunity for the European Union to show that we are the partner that the world can rely on. 4 points. First, a promise to you, and one I know I share with Hadja. I will use every diplomatic channel to mobilize political pressure in response to humanitarian needs, and to ensure that humanitarian principles, humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence are respected. The situation in Gaza, for example, is truly abhorrent. The response to fears of aid being weaponized cannot be to block it, but to flood Gaza with humanitarian aid as much as we can to help those in need. I have conveyed this message at every opportunity, including yesterday's summit with the UK, where it was clear we are aligned on this, and including all the calls I've had with the Israeli government. Humanitarian crises are rarely accidental. They are often the result of political failure, the erosion of basic norms, or impunity. This is why accountability for breaking international and humanitarian law is fundamental. This is my second point. And why last month, together with the Council of Europe, we established a special tribunal for a crime of aggression against Ukraine. The same principle applies the world over. Would-be perpetrators must know they face consequences. My third point is that solidarity is the innate to who we are as human beings. Humanitarian work should be a global effort. Over 90% of European citizens consider it important that the EU funds humanitarian aid. The European Union and our member states collectively make the largest contribution to the UN system.
You're watching The World Today, still to come. Guatemala's first indigenous presidential secretary for women, Maya Mam, vows to fight gender and racial discrimination. Details soon. Please stay with us. To the other crisis in Europe, the U.S. President Donald Trump is making a strong global push to call for an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. He has expressed his views during recent conversations with both President Vladimir Putin and President Volodymyr Zelensky. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, has more.
President Trump stated during his campaign to the White House that he would focus on ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. And after several efforts in a recent call with President Putin, there's not a clear commitment to ending the war.
Just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. Hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up. What a shame that it ever started in the first place.
Russia's president met with press after his call with President Trump, stating that efforts to end the war were on the right track.
Президент Соединенных Штатов высказал свою позицию.
The U.S. president has expressed his position on the ceasefire, and I, for my part, also noted that Russia also favors a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. We should simply determine the most effective ways to move toward peace. We agreed with the U.S. president that Russia will suggest and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace treaty, which defines a number of issues such as the principles of settlement, the terms of a possible peace agreement, and so on, including a possible ceasefire for a certain period of time if the appropriate agreements are reached.
While President Trump's focus has been on speaking with President Putin, he also met with Ukrainian President Zelensky and other European leaders.
We
are considering a meeting of all teams again. We would like it to be at a high level. America, Ukraine, Russia, European countries, and Great Britain. Such a meeting could take place in Turkey, the Vatican, or Switzerland.
President Trump continues to push forward to help end the war, but he is willing to walk away.
We got to get going. And I did say also, if I thought that you couldn't do it, I'd step away, because what are you going to do? We don't have boots on the ground. We wouldn't have boots on the ground. But we do have a big stake. I thought there was a very good chance, like a 50-50 chance, that he would say, I want to take the whole thing. I didn't know what he was going to say. And then they have a different kind of a problem. But I believe he wants to stop. Pretty sure.
The United States' involvement in calling for an end to the Ukrainian and Russian war started with the Biden administration and continues to be a U.S. priority with the Trump administration. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, President Trump says Russia and Ukraine will begin immediate negotiations towards a ceasefire and an end to the war after a 2-hour phone call with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. President Trump describes the call as productive, saying Russia and Ukraine will work out peace conditions themselves. Speaking to reporters shortly after the call, Russian President Vladimir Putin thanked the U.S. president for supporting the resumption of direct negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv on a potential peace agreement. He adds that Mr. Trump had outlined his position on ending hostilities and the possibility of a ceasefire during the conversation. He also spoke with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who called the moment defining and urged the U.S. to stay actively involved in the talks.
I think something's going to happen. It's a very Got very big egos involved, I tell you. Big egos involved. But I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away and they're going to have to keep going. Again, this was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation. Should have remained. But we have, because the past administration felt very strongly that we should be involved, and we got involved much more than Europe did in terms of the money and all of the things that we gave. We gave massive amounts, I think record-setting amounts given to a foreign. There's never been anything like this, both weaponry and money. And Europe gave a lot also, but they didn't give anywhere near what we gave. We gave probably almost 3 times the amount. And it's just a shame. The whole thing is a shame. The level of death here is just a shame. Yeah, of course I did. I talked to him about it. I said, when are we going to end this, Vladimir? I've known him for a long time now. I said, when are we going to end this bloodshed, this bloodbath? It's a bloodbath. And I do believe he wants to end it. You know, when I made the call, I told the people last night, I spoke to the heads of the different countries, Germany and Finland. We had Italy, as you know, and UK was on the line today, and a couple of others. And then they were in turn calling everyone. Ursula was there from the European Union. She was terrific. And we spoke for a long time about it. And they got a problem. It's a big, big problem. It's a terrible war. It's a very hard to extradite themselves away from what's taken place over there. The amount of anger, the amount of hate, and the amount of death. It's very hard, very tough situation. But I said to him, we got to get going. And I did say also, if I thought that you couldn't do it, I'd step away, because what are you going to do? We don't have boots on the ground. We wouldn't have boots on the ground. I hope that, I like to think positively, frankly. I just can't believe that they allow this to continue. This would have never happened if I were president, and most people admit that. It would have, and it didn't happen for 4 years. And October 7th would have never happened either. That's the attack on Israel. That would have never happened. So sad, a lot of things wouldn't have happened, but so sad to see it. Now, I think that there's a good chance we can get this done. I believe Putin wants to do it. Now, if I thought Putin didn't want, I mean, that's what I do. My whole life is like deals, one big deal. And if I thought that President Putin did not want to get this over with, I wouldn't even be talking about it, because I'd just pull out.
In the meantime, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has called on the United States to take strong action against Russia if Moscow does not agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. He says the European Union and all 27 member states remain united in their demand for a full and unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine, a step Ukraine agreed to over 60 days ago. Ms. Kallas emphasized that the U.S. had previously declared its readiness to act decisively if Russia did not agree to a ceasefire, as Ukraine already has. She says the EU expects the same strong action from the United States. Let's bring in Tomiwa Adetilewa, an international affairs analyst, to discuss this further. He joins us from Illinois in the United States. Great to have you on the program.
Good to have you, ma'am.
Right, so last year, President Donald Trump said he would end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Last week, he also said nothing will happen in Ukraine unless he and Putin get together. And now, after the 2-hour phone call with Mr. Putin, he said that the conditions of a peace deal could only be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. How do you interpret President Trump's shifting position?
Yeah, Trump evolving rhetoric reflects a combination of political strategy and improvisation rather than a constant diplomatic framework. His early claim that he could end the war in 24 hours was probably like a campaign hyperbole, and it's designed to distinguish himself from his opponent, trying to say, okay, they are unable to end the war in 2 years, and they can end it in, one day, day one. So the more recent acknowledgement that peace must be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine signal a shift toward realism. And he is likely being influenced by intelligence briefing and the realities of Putin's position. So his comment about needing to get together with Putin suggests a belief in personal diplomacy and a hallmark of Trump foreign policy style. But it's now tempered by the understanding that the U.S. cannot unilaterally impose peace, even though it can still technically end the war, but the way it's going to end it might not be the way that everybody wants it or majority want it.
Right, and Mr. Trump claims that negotiations will begin immediately, yet the Russian president only speaks of a possible future memorandum. How seriously do you take these comments?
It's a serious issue because Trump insistent on immediate talks is likely more aspirational than actionable. Putin mentions of a possible future memorandum is a classic Kremlin tactics. The way Kremlin do their diplomacy is they project openness to dialogue while preserving strategic ambiguity because they don't want people to know what they are going to do anyway. So the mismatch in the tone and timing suggests that while Trump may want quick result for political capital, Russia sees no urgency. So in practical terms, we should take Trump's comment with caution unless they are followed by concrete diplomatic steps, so which haven't materialized yet. So Russia, in its classic Kremlin style of diplomacy, is keeping people in a position where they tends to second guess, are they going to do it, are they not going to do it? So it's a classic Kremlin ambiguity.
Right, and the idea of the U.S. stepping back from talks is something both Mr. Trump and his top officials, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have hinted at. Could the U.S. also end any military and intelligence support for Ukraine?
Sure. There is something a lot of people are not taking into consideration in this conflict, is the fact that Trump have personal animosity against Zelensky. People forget that Trump's first impeachment was blamed on Zelensky because it was a call between Trump and Zelensky that got leaked, and people felt Trump was trying to make Zelensky do certain things that shouldn't be done. And Trump felt Zelensky threw him under the bus, and that the people involved were actually born in Ukraine, like the intelligence officer Colin Vindman was born in Soviet Ukraine, and also the Assistant Secretary of State in the area that time, Victoria Nuland, was also born in Ukraine. So Trump felt he was kind of like set up by people whom he thought were Ukrainians working with Zelensky and to get him impeached. So that personal animosity is there. So it's possible because it's not guaranteed. If Trump thinks there's no reason for him to go with the war, if there's no political capital for him to gain in supporting Ukraine, because most of his MAGA movement are actually against the war. And they think the easiest way to end the war is for US to stop giving Ukraine weapons. Because if US stop giving Ukraine weapons and intelligence, the country of Ukraine is going to collapse. Yeah. So if Trump see no political gain in supporting Ukraine further, yes, he's just going to back out. I mean, you know, Trump is a businessman. He sees everything with the signs of dollars. How much dollar is coming to the United States? What is the political capital for me in this? If he's not going to get anything, if America is not going to get anything, yeah, he's going to back out. That is very, very possible.
And do you think in the peace in Ukraine can ever be brokered by a third party, going by everything we've just talked about?
It depends on what you mean by peace. So peace is an ambiguity. Peace have a multiple meaning in this case. So here is a fact on the ground. 3 people can end the war in 24 hours. The first person is Zelensky, second person is Putin, third person is Trump. So if Zelensky surrender to Putin today, the war is going to end. If Trump stop giving Zelensky intelligence and military support, the war will end. If Putin rolls back all his military and give back the territory taken from Ukraine back to Ukrainian, the war will end. So all those three men are in position to actually end the war. Now, the situation is, if any of those three scenarios happen, does that mean there is peace? Definitely no. So if, let's say, Trump stops supporting Ukraine and the war ends, but there's still no peace. If Ukraine figure out how to defeat Russia and Russia capitulate, yes, the war ends, but there's still no peace. If Russia figure out a way to collapse the regime in Kyiv, there will still be insurgency of those ethnic Ukrainians who doesn't want to be governed by Russian puppet. So the definition of peace in this case is it's undefined. Let me say peace in this case is undefined. So ending the war is one thing, achieving peace is another thing. So I think the first thing we should all focus on right now is ending the war. The terms and conditions of ending the war is what will determine whether there will be peace or there will not be peace.
Right. Tomiwa, thank you for your time today. A pleasant time talking to you about these issues.
You're welcome, man. Thank you, too.
Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU's budget has reached its breaking point after years of crisis management. Citing a series of major events from natural disasters to war, Ms. von der Leyen says the Union's financial framework set up in 2020 is no longer fit for purpose. She went on to stress that Europe faces a new era of instability, marked by geopolitical tensions, shifting trade dynamics, climate emergencies, and rapid technological change.
In the last 5 years, I must say we have constantly tested the limits of what our budget could achieve. I remember the long meetings with our services every time an emergency hit. And every time we managed to find creative ways to mobilize our financial firepower for the people and for the business of Europe. For example, during the sharp economic downturns in the pandemic, with the shutdowns, we raised money for our member states with Next Generation EU. We turned a safety buffer in the budget, the famous headroom, into a very powerful emergency tool to finance our recovery and our energy security. I would not want to dare to think about how it would have been without Next Generation EU. We used all the built-in flexibilities to respond to emergencies. If you think of the floods in Italy, the earthquake in Croatia, but also Putin's full-scale invasion and the energy blackmail we went through. So, over the past 5 years, time and again, our budget has punched above its weight. And we must also see now, today, that we have reached the limits of what is possible. Our current budget was designed for a world which no longer exists. It was the world of 2020. And think of 2020 and today. Today, geopolitical tensions are rising. We see the trade rules that are being rewritten. We see extreme weather events more and more frequent due to climate change. We see the change in technology that is faster than ever. So the new normal is anything but normal.
Well, the Trump administration has agreed to a $5 million settlement with family of Ashley Babbitt, the U.S. Air Force veteran who was shot and killed by a Capitol Police officer during the January 6th attack on Congress. Ms. Babbitt was shot in the shoulder after attempting to climb through a door. She was part of a group of Trump supporters trying to halt the certification of Joe Biden's 2020 election victory. Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger reported that he is extremely disappointed by the settlement, emphasizing that the officer involved was cleared of any wrongdoing after multiple investigations. The settlement resolves a $30 million wrongful death lawsuit brought by Babbitt's family, with backing from the conservative legal group Judicial Watch. While the officer was not charged, Babbitt's death has remained a flashpoint in political debates surrounding the Capitol riot, an event that left 5 people dead and led to hundreds of federal prosecutions. Meanwhile, the United States Supreme Court says it will allow President Trump's administration to terminate deportation protections for 350,000 Venezuelans in the country. The ruling lifts a hold that was placed by a California judge that kept temporary protected status in place for Venezuelans whose status would have expired last month. Temporary protected status allows people to live and work in the United States legally if their home countries are deemed unsafe due to things like countries experiencing wars, natural disasters, or other extraordinary and temporary conditions. The ruling marks a win for President Donald Trump, who has repeatedly tried to use the Supreme Court to enact immigration policy decisions. Meanwhile, President Trump has described Joe Biden's announcement of being diagnosed with cancer as a very sad situation. Mr. Trump made these comments during a law enforcement event at the White House, questioning why his predecessor did not make the announcement sooner. Over the weekend, former President Joe Biden announced that he has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer that has spread to his bones.
Well, because I think there's a chance of getting something done. And if you do that, you can also make it much worse. But there could be a time when that's going to happen. I'm surprised that it wasn't, the public wasn't notified a long time ago, because to get to stage 9, that's a long time. I just had my physical. You saw that. You saw the results of that particular test. I think that test is standard to pretty much anybody getting a physical, good physical. We had the doctors at the White House and over at Walter Reed, which is a fantastic hospital, do it. I did a very complete physical, including cognitive tests. I'm proud to announce I aced it. Got them all. I got them all right. You proud of me? Yes. Your husband would be proud of me for getting them all right. It's a little risk. If I didn't get them all right, these people would be after me. It would be not a good situation. But I think, frankly, anybody running for president should take a cognitive test. They say it's unconstitutional, but I would say in that particular case, having a cognitive test wouldn't be so bad. But when you take tests, medical, as a male, that test is very standard. I don't know if it's given to everybody, but it's given just about. And it takes a long time to get to that situation. Now, I think, to get to a stage 9, I think that if you take a look, it's the same doctor that said that Joe was cognitively fine. There was nothing wrong with him. Well, he said, if it's the same doctor, he said there was nothing wrong there, and that's being proven to be a sad situation. And the auto pen is becoming a very big deal. The auto pen is becoming a big deal because it seems like that maybe was the president who ever operated the auto pen. But when they say that that was not good, they also, you have to look and you have to say that the test was not so good either. In other words, there are things going on that the public wasn't informed. And I think somebody's going to have to speak to his doctor, if it's the same, or even if it's 2 separate doctors. Why wasn't the cognitive ability, why wasn't that discussed? And I think the doctor said he's just fine, and it's turned out that's not so. It's very dangerous. Look, this is no longer politically correct. This is dangerous for our country. Look at the mess we're in. You're talking about all these questions on Ukraine and Russia that would have never happened. As an example, if I were president, would have never happened. The other thing is you have to say, why did it take so long? I mean, this takes a long time. It can take years to get to this level of danger. So it's a very, very sad situation, and I feel very badly about it.
And still to come on the program, the 4th edition of the exhibition Make It in the Emirates showcases homegrown advanced technology in Abu Dhabi. Stay with us for details. Welcome back. In Guatemala, an indigenous woman leads the presidential secretariat for women for the first time. Maya Mam, lawyer Ana Lopez Sills assumed the position last month following a long history of defending women and indigenous people's rights. In an exclusive interview, she vowed to fight against state policies of exclusion and racism, describing her appointment as an opportunity to empower women and indigenous people. The presidential secretary emphasized that the exclusion of women and the absence of the state results in extreme poverty, advocating for strengthening women's participation in decision-making processes. Heavy rainfall has left parts of Bengaluru, India's Silicon Valley, submerged, disrupting daily activities in the country's southern city. Authorities say the city has been placed on high alert for additional pre-monsoon showers as cyclonic activities develop over the Andaman Sea. Meanwhile, 3 people, including a 12-year-old boy, have died in the rain-related incidents. Bengaluru is home to major global technology companies, many of whom have asked their employees to work from home due to flooded roads. And member states of the World Health Organization have formally adopted by consensus the world's first pandemic agreement, announced the United Nations health body in a statement. The agreement aims to ensure countries work together for effective prevention, preparation, and response to future pandemics. The landmark decision by the 78th World Health Assembly culminates more than 3 years of intensive negotiations launched by governments in response to the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and driven by the goal of making the world safer. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the WHO Director General, says the world is safer today thanks to the leadership, collaboration, and commitment of our member states to adopt the historic WHO pandemic agreement. The Nigerians in Diaspora Commission has successfully aided the return of a 41-year-old Adiola, daughter of veteran Nollywood actress Jumoke George from Mali. Adiola was found in Mali recently after she was sold into slavery. Unable to make her way back home, her disappearance first became public when her mother revealed the distressing news during a talk show interview. Adiola had been missing for 4 years. Following the interview, the talk show host, Biola Adebayo, reached out to NIDCOM, which also contacted the acting Nigerian High Commissioner in Mali to facilitate her transportation back to Nigeria. Chairman of NIDCOM, Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Arewa, welcomed Adiola, advising citizens to learn from her story. She warns others to resist any temptation of any supposed job offers in Libya, Mali, as it's all a journey to slavery. And in Abu Dhabi, the 4th edition of the landmark Make It in the Emirates Forum, a major showcase of the UAE's growing industrial and technological capabilities, kicked off on Monday, drawing thousands of visitors. The event features more than 700 companies exhibiting cutting-edge products across sectors, including automotive, agri-tech, food security, marine manufacturing, healthcare, and even space travel. Among the key innovations, Alexander Winkler of Aspire presented the first motor racing car entirely developed in the UAE. Meanwhile, Omar Hafa of Steer AI introduced a multi-purpose off-road vehicle designed in Abu Dhabi for patrolling, search and rescue operations. UAE Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology Sultan Al Jaber highlighted the country's rapid industrial growth, noting that industrial exports surged to over $53 billion in 2024, a 68% increase since 2021. According to the Abu Dhabi Media Office, the event, which is still ongoing till May 22nd, has already drawn more than 50,000 visitors.
Now, next to me, you see something we call the EAV-24, on which currently we're working on an evolution of, which we will code the EAV-25. Effectively, what it is the first racing series born and bred in the UAE. Now that's where the commonalities with what the human racing series has stops. We've removed all of the human components, so steering wheels, pedals, as well as some safety equipment, like the padding around the helmet, and we've replaced it with an autonomous stack, skid, designed here in the UAE.
This buggy was made in here in Abu Dhabi with the technology from the researchers at the Technology Innovation Institute. So they transformed the buggy from the ground up by adding the sensors, the compute, the communications layer to make it autonomous, and today it can go off-road for multiple use cases, for patrolling, for search and rescue, or any other use case that you might think of.
And we are here at It Emirates today with our Falcon family of large language models, which is the proud UAE achievement in the large language models domain. You can see the entire sort of flying bird behind me, which represents the national pride of the UAE, with the one of the best performing open source large language models in the world. And behind me you can see AI-71 products, which are specific to enterprise and construction domains here.
And that's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.